Poaching is a critical issue affecting the health and sustainability of Oregon's fish and wildlife populations. The impact of wildlife crime is devastating. Nearly 5,000 wild animals were poached in Oregon last year. Future generations deserve to experience Oregon's fish and wildlife. Protect Oregon's wildlife. Turn in poachers. Visit protectoregonswildlife.com.
Poaching hurts Oregon's fish and wildlife populations. Poaching can take many forms, including illegally killing fish and wildlife, taking fish or wildlife out of season, or using someone else's license or tags. Do your part by reporting wildlife crime. Dial star OSP to report poaching, or call 1-800-452-7888. For more information, visit protectoregonswildlife.com. We can all help protect Oregon's fish and wildlife populations by turning in poachers. What makes a good tip? Description of activity or violation, date, time, and location of activity, vehicle description, suspect description, and type of wildlife involved. Do your part by turning in poachers. If you suspect poaching, visit protectoregonswildlife.com. Dial star OSP on your mobile device or call 1-800-452-7888. Any tip helps and can be anonymous.
all smiles.
Make sure she's in there. I walked in. Oh, so she's in the classroom.
She's here. Okay. Hello.
Yeah, it's. You're ready. Not yet. Anytime you guys are ready.
We're ready.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I have the wrong glasses on. Humans got to have the right glasses. Good morning, everyone, both here and online. Thank you for being here, and especially thank you for the engagement in this recruitment process. From the outset of this process, the Fish and Wildlife Commission prioritized making this process open, fair, and inclusive, and we deeply appreciate the level of the literally hundreds of people who have engaged in this. I'll give you a quick overview for today of just the high points. Then we'll do introductions, and then I'm going to spend a few minutes. I'm going to come back and spend a few minutes on the process and our approach, and I'll ask the vice chair to also do the same, and then we'll go right to the public forum. So for today, just the quickest overview. We'll do a temporary rule because we need to deal with those each time we meet. Then I'll take a few minutes to describe the process and the approach, as will the vice chair. And then we do the public candidate forum for questions to the final candidates. And Patrick David from MODIS will facilitate that. And SEIU, a union that represents many of our staff statewide, the people who make our mission happen, will be involved in that because they are involved with the staff who make our mission happen. And then the bulk of the day will be the executive session for the commission to interview the candidates, to hear recommendations from the governor, from the tribes, and from the public. And we'll be sure to mention how the public can comment during the public forum so that those comments could then be summarized for us in our deliberations. And we will spend significant time deliberating on this, and then at the end of the day, return to regular session for a discussion and for our decision. So to start, I'm Mary Wall, Chair of the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and I would like to call our Friday, February 10th, 2024 meeting to order. And I'll ask the other commissioners to introduce themselves.
I'm Becky Hatfield Hyde.
Good morning, Mark Labhart, and I live in Sisters.
Yeah, good morning. Bob Spellbrink, Sledge, Oregon.
Kathy Ann Khalil, Portland, Oregon.
Good morning, Dr. Leslie King, Portland. Thank you. And interim
morning.
director.
I'm in the interim director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Davia Palmieri.
And Michelle Tate, could you introduce yourself and also talk about the platform or anything people need to hear?
Good morning. My name is Michelle Tate. I'm with the Director's Office here at ODFW. I'm here today to provide support to the Commission and to the Director for this meeting. I thought about anything else that I needed to tell folks. We will be having a fairly long executive session today, so we'll try. I don't know that we'll be able to even estimate what time we'll be out of that. So just kind of stay tuned to what we have going, and we'll make sure that when we get close that we put up a splash screen online so that you'll know that what time we're anticipating to return when we start to get close to that.
Thank you. With your indulgence, I would like to spend just a few minutes going through the steps that we have taken and the process, and then talk just a bit about our approach. The first is that we started with selecting attributes, and the vice chair will talk about those later some more. But we were looking for attributes that the director needed to have. That was based on public input from many, and I do mean many people across the state. The candidates were scored based on those attributes, and the questions for the interviews, the screening interviews, were based on those attributes. There has been close coordination throughout this between the commission and the governor's office, and we jointly did screening interviews last Friday. Some of you heard those. There has been an exceptionally, even by ODF and W standards, an exceptionally high number of comments come in the last week, and all of those have been transmitted to the commission. For the public candidate forum today, I mentioned SEIU, the union that represents many of our staff across the state. They will be involved, heavily involved, and have been in that public candidate forum. There will be online comments that you can make during the public forum, and when I finish, the director will mention how that happens in terms of the public comments. The governor interviewed the candidates earlier this week, and we'll get that recommendation transmitted to us by the governor's natural resource advisor, Jeff Huntington, when we're deliberating this afternoon after the interviews. The tribal nations had representatives meet with the final candidates yesterday. Their recommendations will come to us in two ways. One, the director, our director, Davia Palmieri, will transmit those to us in the executive session, and the tribes have also transmitted in writing their views, and those we will have time this afternoon in the deliberations to look at the written transmission. The commission, when we go into executive session, we'll do the interviews, of course, with each candidate. We get the summaries that I just mentioned, and then we have time, to discuss what we heard and received from throughout this process and to ask questions. During those deliberations, we will have a chance to review, we'll stop, take a break, and give people a chance to review any more of the written materials that they need to go through. And then we'll come back for the public session for the commission to discuss, decide, and vote at the end of the day if possible. If we have to, we'll go into tomorrow. It looks like we may be able to do it today, but we are set to go to tomorrow if that's necessary. And then I would like to talk just a bit about our approach. And a few of these things I said last week, and I'm going to repeat a couple of them because they need to be said to anybody that didn't get to hear them last week, if you will. I have been involved over the years in multiple hiring processes. This one stands out for being fair, open, and broadly inclusive of people across the entire state who are engaged with, care about, and wanted to be involved now and in the future in shaping how Oregon's fish, wildlife, and habitats resources are managed and protected. The desired attributes I already mentioned for the ODF and W director were selected by the commission, and input about those attributes came from the tribes, from the Oregonians across the state, and the union that represents many of the ODF and W staff. Those attributes served as a basis for forming the interview questions, as well as scoring the candidates. And we did have a strong candidate pool. So those attributes were used to score the candidates, and the ones that rose through that scoring process were the ones we interviewed in the screening interviews. Just a few more pieces that I want to mention. We started with a strong candidate pool, and now we're in the final round with two exceptionally qualified candidates. Two candidates that have more than 2 decades each of high-level natural resource experience. Each of them also has vision and leadership qualities honed in roles leading programs and/or organizations in policy, in administration, in trying to solve complex issues across wide groups of people, in legal issues, in fiscal issues, and we have just exceptionally qualified people in this final round. We all, and I do mean all, have a mission to protect and enhance Oregon's fish, wildlife, and habitat resource for this and future generations. And what frames all of this for me is our existing staff. We have about 1,200 staff across Oregon who manage and protect our fish and wildlife and our habitat resources, and who are a critical resource themselves. It's our job to find a leader to support those 1,200 people carrying out our mission. There is, probably all of us are too aware of this, a certain divisiveness in many public discussions now. We owe it to ourselves, I think, to these candidates, and especially to staff, to keep this process and our comments during the public comment throughout this whole thing respectful. Because what we're doing here is building the next chapter for this agency and our collective work. So what we're looking for from this commission is for unity. We're looking for a leader and foundation to continue ODF&W's work in the context of the climate change resilience that we need, the water issues and scarcity issues that are happening, and the other growing challenges for our fish, wildlife, and habitat. So what we're looking for in this process, and what we have been able to hold together so far in the process, is unity of purpose. And we are looking for that from ourselves on the commission, from you, and we need to find it for this director, whomever we choose, so that we can then unite behind that director and our staff. So that's our day. Let's find that director, and I will let the vice chair talk about attributes a bit more.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wall. I don't know about you all, but I woke up this morning kind of excited. This is really this is a great day. Thinking about what we get to do, and so I've also been thinking, you know, there have been hundreds and hundreds of comments come in, and we did start this process with the attributes, and I talked to Mary this week, and I said, I would really like to read through those attributes again, just to remind us that this is what we're looking for. So plus also, I'm the kid that liked to read aloud. Don't give me any math flashcards, but read aloud is fun. So here we go. These are the desired attributes. Highly ethical, transparent, and committed to the tenets of good governance in a public setting. Demonstrated strategic and visionary leadership, big picture oriented with a clear vision. Demonstratable experience problem solving using innovative approaches with proven track record of adapting proactively in an evolving decision-making environment. Extensive experience leading a large and diverse organization, including a union represented workforce. Track record as a role model for staff featuring active presence and engagement, promoting a safe and diverse work environment and workforce. Management experience implementing a dynamic business model with a focus on fiscal integrity of a public agency. Extensive natural resource management experience, including development of policies, rules, and statutes. Demonstrated leadership identifying and addressing critical emerging issues such as climate change impacts and biodiversity loss. Extensive natural resource management experience identifying and solving complex cross-agency landscape scale problems. Demonstratable experience working with legislators and other elected officials. Deep understanding of the important relationship federally recognized tribal governments have with the department's mission and management responsibilities. Experience leading stakeholder engagement processes in which there may be diverse and mutually exclusive interests in the desired policy or program outcomes being discussed. Someone who understands and appreciates both the interests and concerns of traditional stakeholders and those of citizens whose engagement with habitat, fish, and wildlife is primarily wildlife viewing, hiking, habitat protection and conservation, and/or the ecosystem services provided by public resource assets. Specifically, someone who understands the background and history, especially as it pertains to traditional stakeholders, but also acknowledges the need to be an inclusive organization by recognizing and seizing opportunities to build a bigger tent. Must be decisive while also applying adaptive management, highly effective communication skills, with demonstrated experience working with a diverse audience, including stakeholders, customers, advocates, tribes, the scientific community, legislators, and other elected officials. A collaborative partner with federal and state government agencies, as well as other multi-jurisdictional bodies. And all of this is, of course, to serve, to protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. So whoever made that up did a pretty good job. Okay, so what I'm hoping for us this morning is to just enjoy this and welcome our candidates and 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 be warm to them. Imagine going through this process as a candidate. It's absolutely grueling, what we're putting these candidates through. So I know it's going to be a great day. Let's start it.
Thank
Let's
you.
roll.
And the first thing, thank you, Vice Chair. And the first thing we'll do is have Director Palmieri tell us what this is on the screen.
Do you want to do the temporary rule? So you're going to do that later.
You're right. Let's do this and then I'll do the temporary rule. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen and what hopefully you're seeing if you're viewing online is a big QR code. There's also a URL associated with that. We are using an online form this morning to collect feedback. There is no public testimony in the room or online, but you can provide written feedback live this morning. And encourage you to use that QR code or enter the link as you see it there. It will be on all of the slides. So you should be able to keep finding it all morning as you need it. During the candidate forum, which will start soon, we'll keep that open. We'll close it around 11:30 this morning, so you'll have some time to think after the candidate forum ends as well. And then we will provide all of that information to the commissioners for their review this afternoon as part of their deliberation. So they'll have that information.
I do need to mention that after I told you that we would do the temporary rule, I skipped right past it and was ready to go right into the public forum. So we will take a minute and consider the temporary rule. Commissioners, are there any questions you have about that temporary rule? And if not, could I have a motion to adopt it? Questions?
That's my question.
Sorry, I did not draft.
I can,
The one-
I'll
go ahead.
adopt
Commissioner.
one temporary rule in today's agenda.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the temporary rule that's laid out in the in today's formal agenda. Those in favor, could we have a thumb vote on this one? Michelle, it's unanimous. And now we can go to Patrick. And if you will introduce yourself, Patrick, and talk about the public forum, and we can get started.
Thank you, Chair Wall. My name is Patrick David. I'm with Modus Recruiting and Staffing. I'm an executive search recruiting consultant. Today's public forum, we will have the opportunity, as Vice Chair Becky Hatfield-Hyde has said, a joyous conversation welcoming the candidates today. They will receive questions from SEIU and questions from myself that have been formed through the public input of Oregonians across the state. And so we welcome this opportunity to hear the candidates and their responses. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first candidate is on her way.
Okay. No announcements you have to make before they start?
Don't think so.
Okay, you're off the hook. We'll just wait a minute. There we go. She did come. Not that there should be pressure on you from a big room full of people waiting for you. Welcome, Debbie.
Good morning. Good morning.
And we are ready to start, so go ahead.
Good morning, Debbie. Before we begin with questions, we would love the opportunity for you to take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the commission, the public here present, and also the viewers across all over.
Yes, across the state, there are people online.
I was going to start with a really dumb joke, like, you know, how I just needed Michelle to load my 15 slides for my presentation. But I think she's been through enough this week. I'm not even going to go there. So thank you. And again, I'm Debbie Colbert. I'll introduce myself. And just want to start by saying how honored I am to be considered for the position of Director of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And really, honestly, I want to start by thanking all of you for all of the work that you've done to, you know, manage this recruitment, to ensure that it was done in a way that people could really engage, especially the subcommittee folks. It's been a lot of extra work, and just wanted to thank you. And then also thank all of the folks that have taken the opportunity to engage with you at the different parts of the process, providing input on kind of what was needed in a director, what they thought was important in terms of the future. And I'll say that it's been a good experience for me to be a part of this process and to see that feedback that you've gotten through all of these different channels. Also looking, not always a good idea, but looking at a lot of social media to get a sense of where people are coming from. And then just having opportunities for conversation as part of this process. And I will say that it's really helped me to get clear and to pay more attention to what folks care about and also what they're worried about. It's been a good reminder to me about the importance of what we do for so many Oregonians. Humbling. Not just species conservation. I mean, that, you know, of course, habitat restoration, providing fishing and hunting opportunities, but also the many livelihoods that are sustained by our work. And that's either through outdoor recreation and the indirect spending in so many, especially smaller coastal and rural communities, and through hunting and fishing related activities that have direct and indirect economic benefits to our state, you know, to the tune of $1 billion a year. Again, those are the things that, you know, when you're in the day in and the day out, you kind of, you know, those things, maybe you take them a little bit for granted at times. And so again, just being part of this process has been, you know, an opportunity for me to reground in those ways. And it reinforces my excitement for this opportunity. I was not really going to focus my remarks on my resume. You all have seen my resume. You know my decades of work in natural resources across the state. You know my science background. I thought that I would focus more on what I bring to the position and what I would focus on as director. What I bring. I bring a track record of building partnerships and empowering staff and teams to overcome significant challenges and advance conservation on a statewide scale. At the Water Resources Department, this work included critical issues around stream flow restoration and meeting future water supplies through conservation and planning. As the ODFW admin deputy, it included leading efforts to address significant financial challenges facing the agency by modernizing and streamlining processes and securing savings and revenues to stabilize the agency. In my current role, these past almost 3 years, this work has included standing up our newly recreated Habitat Division, positioning the agency to aggressively and successfully pursue federal infrastructure funding, standing up teams and new approaches to execute on our highest priority initiatives, and implementing significant new investments like the 2022 drought package. As director, I will continue to work tirelessly to maintain and build partnerships, to advance solutions that are based on best available science, to secure new funding to support our broad conservation mission, and to seek out and enable as many voices as possible. And if I'm selected, I think y'all are getting tired of hearing me say this, but I'm going to say it one more time. I'm going to continue to bring a sense of urgency around delivering outcomes for fish and wildlife and their habitat. I'm proud to work at an agency with the mission, the talented staff, and dedicated managers necessary to address the growing complexity of fish, wildlife, and habitat challenges. Of course, as an agency, we can't solve these complex problems in a vacuum. As a collective natural resource community, we're grappling with large-scale impacts from climate change, drought, and wildfire, impacts on fish and wildlife populations from invasive species, habitat loss, and other factors, and increasing societal demands for water, energy, and land development. In the face of this growing complexity and challenges, as an agency, we must continue to learn, adapt, and set strategic priorities, bring even more intention and focus to our work. It's the same basic how. I mean, in so many ways, it's the stuff we do. Showing up for difficult conversations, and those are going to get harder in the face of climate change and some of the trade-offs that we're going to have to talk about as Oregonians. Relying on best available science, conducted in a transparent way, and engaging with curiosity and authenticity with our customers, our volunteers, our elected officials, our advocates, our tribal leaders and staff. And again, prioritizing our efforts strategically so we can be successful. We've all said it a million times. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. As director, I'm also very, very committed to positioning the agency to more effectively engage all Oregonians. During this recruitment, there's been talk of a tent, building a bigger tent. I see our mission as the tent that extends to all Oregon and all Oregonians to protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. That includes those that want to engage with the outdoors and those that recreate through hunting and fishing, and those who care deeply about biodiversity in our state, those whose cultural practices and whose livelihoods depend on sustainable populations of fish and wildlife. It is critical to our fish and wildlife and their habitat that people care and that even more people care. As director, I'm looking forward to leaning in to how we use storytelling to inspire Oregonians and how we meet people where they are with messages that are relevant to diverse audiences. And match that with opportunities to connect with the outdoors, empowering our staff and our I&E and elsewhere, and working with so many of the organizations that we've begun to work with through the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund to get creative, to experiment, be a little risky, right? In terms of how we do that engagement. At the same time, building the bigger connections, I also don't want to lose sight of telling the story and bringing attention and celebrating the partnerships we already have. We can, it's, when you think about how, you do an effort and you do a retrospective and you think about how it went, people forget to focus on what's going well. And you can't take that for granted. And so I also want to lean into how do we celebrate those partnerships more intentionally. So again, I'm excited about this opportunity and frankly about this opportunity right now. I feel like we've got momentum, we've got good relationships, we have a lot of buy-in around the urgency and the needs. And honestly, we got some problems. That are coming. But I think that is going to even motivate us all more to come to the table to look for solutions. And I think that I bring the right combination of background, statewide experience, and existing relationships to advance the work for the agency. So thank you very much for considering me, and look forward to answering the questions.
Thank you, Debbie. We're gonna go now to the Teams meeting, and we should be receiving questions from SEIU members.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
We can see you, Chris, if you want to go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can't hear you.
I have my mic on.
Chris, give us one moment while we figure out technical difficulties.
Kelly, can you unmute and see if we can hear you?
Hi, this is Kelly. Can you hear me?
Okay.
This is Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay.
Chris, can you try again?
Good morning. This is Chris.
All right.
Hey, Chris, we can hear you now. There you are.
Patience.
Excellent. So we'll go to the first question coming from Christopher Rodriguez. And I think that question is on the next slide.
Good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Interim Director Palmieri, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Chris Rodriguez, Sublocal 109 Vice President, located in Astoria. I'm here on behalf of over 800 union represented staff. We would like to express our gratitude for being included today because it is important for staff to have a voice in this process. Question 1. ODFW staff often engage the public while performing their duties for the agency, often in remote areas of the state with spotty reception. This means that workers may encounter dangerous individuals or people engaging in illegal activities harmful to habitats or wildlife. Can you tell us a time where you worked with the staff to implement safety procedures to protect your staff? And can you tell us how staff are an integral part of the development for field safety plans?
Thank you, Chris. I am so excited to have this question. And I want to start by just saying that when I think about safety in the field, just want to note that I've put my time in the field. And I think that's part of why it's so close to my heart. Just to kind of share my story in terms of field work, I've done a lot out there. I have actually been a fish sampler for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. I've done beach seines in Elkhorn Slough Reserve, turtle nesting studies in the Chesapeake Bay, outplanting mussels for bioaccumulation studies for the Mussel Watch program in California, sampling sediment from rivers and streams as part of Bay Protection Program in California. conducting research on metal accumulation in sediments in some of the worst scuba diving conditions imaginable in LA and Long Beach harbors, months at sea on research vessels, and closer to home, 2.5 years in field work for my PhD studying nutrient cycling in Tillamook Bay Estuary and the 5 rivers that feed the estuary. I share this not to demonstrate that I used to be cool, but to say that field science is in my bones, and that when I think about, being the director of an agency that is so distributed and has such varying work on the ground, this is the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night, is that everybody comes home safe. I can absolutely commit to ensuring staff are an integral part of developing field safety plans. It just makes sense. 60% of our staff are boots on the ground in our 93 offices across the state, in our research and monitoring programs, our 33 hatcheries, 20 wildlife areas, and they are facing a wide range of conditions that's based on the type of work they're doing. Of course, that we have an agency culture that really promotes safety overall, but thinking about safety on the ground is really a nuance to our priority around safety. And it depends on knowing what staff are worried about. I mean, there's no way for us to be sitting in the headquarters office and pushing out safety plans without engaging our field staff directly. And so I also have some firsthand experience in this. And I would say that you have to start by listening and gathering a sense of what the safety concerns are out there. A good example is from my days as the Field Services Division Administrator at Oregon Water Resources Department. Similar distributed field-based programs like we have at ODFW across the state. And I kind of feel like I have to say back in my day of doing that, all cannabis groves were illegal. And we had staff working all over the state. And the conditions were getting worse and worse. And we had folks that were out there doing stream surveys, measuring flows, regulating water use, and coming upon just really, really scary situations. And so we stepped in and we basically worked with our staff so we could bring in Oregon State Police. We had kind of conversations so the OSP could really kind of help our staff understand some of the dynamics around these operations, what to look for. I mean, a lot of it is just recognizing unsafe conditions and getting out of there. And so we really developed safety protocols and strategies with our staff in response to what we were seeing on the ground. And so that's just one example to share kind of from my prior experience. And then I would just mention a more recent example of engaging field staff. We just over the last year or so joined up with a number of natural resource agencies, and we surveyed all of our field staff together, one survey, regarding encounters with members of the public in the field. And we wanted to understand from them kind of what were the trends in terms of negative encounters. Was there geographic trends? Was it related to the type of work? Like, if you're doing compliance work, you tend to have more negative encounters. Was it related to access? Just really get a sense from them on what was happening on the ground from their perspective, and then also asked what would be most helpful for them. And the number one thing that we heard from them is more training, more peer-to-peer conversations. And so we have been working with the governor's office over the last several months to really identify those training opportunities. Unfortunately, there is really no perfect existing off-the-shelf approach, but we have been learning from other agencies that have been really kind of on the leading edge, like the Oregon Parks and Recs Department, about how they deal with negative encounters with the public in the field. And basically preparing resources for the natural resource agencies to bring back, including ODFW, to work with our staff in terms of how do we connect them with those, how do we build in these trainings and this work together. So again, it's one of those things where you have to understand where they're coming from, what they're worried about, what they think would be most responsive, and then find those resources. And now we'll be bringing them back and working with our staff and our managers and supervisors in terms of how we get that those staff connected with those resources.
Thank you, Debbie. We're going to move to the second SEIU question at this moment.
Thanks again, Debbie. Question number 2. Can everybody hear me still?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Question 2. Experienced ODFW staff work tirelessly to navigate complex policies, budgets, and regulations to ensure their habitats are healthy and sustainable for wildlife to thrive. Can you tell us a time where you actively involved expert staff in policy development to bridge the gap between decision makers and on-the-ground staff with their local expertise? Can you commit to working with staff in policy development?
Thank you again, Chris. So again, I'll just start by saying that I absolutely can commit to working with staff in policy development and do so in my current position. And I will say, Chris, there's a lot of things when I hear policy development, my mind goes a lot of different directions, like what that could mean. And the short answer is across all of those interpretations. And so just to give you an example, sometimes it's policy development, like fish and wildlife policy, like what we would bring for the commission. And as you all know, and pretty much I think anyone that works with us, fish and wildlife policy really does reside with our on-the-ground fish and wildlife biologists and staff. They are the experts that are bringing the science and the data that is informing these decisions at the highest level, including the commission. Then so like for me, that's the big P policy. Then there's things like operational policies, like how we do the work of the agency, things like a uniform policy or safety policies. And I would continue to use teams of staff from across the agency, rely on our labor management committee. They are very good at bringing voices forward across the agency to ensure that we continue to make sure that those operational policies are also grounded by input from our staff across the state. And then the last is really, honestly, it's kind of just how we get the work done. And again, largely driven by staff and the way I think it should be. I like enabling good ideas from staff. It's one of my favorite things. I like processes that leverage that know-how and give it opportunities to rise up in the organization. And this isn't going to sound very exciting, but it's exciting to me. So I'm going to tell you about this. When I was at Water Resources Department, we had major backlogs in things that are called water right transfers. And they're really important to the state because this is how people move water around. It's a pretty much appropriated system. So if you have a new need or a different need, you have to come to the state and you have to apply to do it through a water right transfer. We had this huge backlog. And it was really a problem for people to make investments, to make plans, to develop their operations for any given year. So I introduced, and this is probably not even the cool language anymore, but I introduced a concept called Lean Kaizen, process improvement, at the department. And the whole concept of Lean Kaizen is you put a team, frontline team members in a room for however long it takes, and you say, you figure out how to do this better. And whatever you come up with will be implemented. Now they pop out, to say, hey, we're going to need some resources, like, and then you run off as like the person supporting the effort and you find them resources or you problem solve, or they go, this is going to really make so-and-so upset. And so you go and you work the lines of like trying to kind of figure out if you could get buy-in and other groups, in the agency. And we did this in a number of processes and it works. It really does. And partly it is because that's where the good ideas come from. Partly it's kind of like you put staff in a no-fly zone. They have so much on their plate, right? You give them permission to do nothing else but think about that problem and help you solve it. It's really cool. And when I was deputy at ODFW, we did the same thing. I mean, you've all heard about some of the financial challenges that we had at that time. We did the same thing. And it's how we did massive improvements in how we processed grants and contracts, collected revenue, processed personnel actions. And I don't want anyone outside the agency to be too judgy. But at one point, we had a team that was working on how we process personnel actions. And they were working and working and working. And, it was just like little tweak, little tweak, little tweak. And so this is what you do to them. I walked in there and part of what they did is they had kind of quantified every step in the personnel action process and how long it took to go from here to here to here. And I said to them, do you realize that you've set a goal for us to, like, your big goal is for us to process these within, I'm going to make up a number, 30 days. And I just looked at your timelines and a blank sheet of paper would take 30 days to go through the current process. You have to just start over. And we got great results. And so again, sorry to go on this tangent, but just I really see the power in enabling good ideas. More recently, I'll give an example that's near and dear to the commission's heart. We have our new beaver action plan. So our commission set the direction that they wanted to see the pace and scale of beaver restoration on a landscape scale moving at a faster pace. That was the direction. Well, you know how we did that? We said, hey, we can't do it perfect everywhere. Like, we've got limited bandwidth. So we went to the field and we said, okay, watershed managers, work with your staff. You find where you think we can have the best wins, where we can make the most progress. We said, and it could be really different across the state, and that's okay. Some places we really had some gaps in what we even knew about beavers, and that's where we had to start. Some places we had partners that were just killing it, and we just needed to jump on and just amplify their work. And in other places, we really needed to be the catalyst. But we didn't tell them. That came out of our field. And again, I just think it's another example of, I know we say policy, but I say everything. So there you go. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for your questions. We're going to move on to, we have 4 remaining questions, Debbie. We need to be mindful of time.
How am I doing? Am I doing terrible?
No, you're
Okay.
doing great, Debbie.
Okay.
So let's move on to the next question. So this question is, how would you address the challenge of bridging divides between urban and rural communities to foster unity in conservation efforts? How would you ensure that conservation initiatives are inclusive and responsive to the needs of Oregonians, regardless of their geographical location or background? And can you provide an example of a successful leadership strategy you implemented to bring together diverse perspectives and build consensus around a shared vision for conservation and natural resource management? And yes, that's one question.
Seems like a story. Okay, here we go. Again, just such a good question, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I think that we could probably all talk about this for multiple days, and it is something that I think the commission and the department leadership have been wrestling with this. I don't mean to sound naive, but here's what I think about the rural-urban divide. I think fish and wildlife are the bridge, not the divide. And I'll tell you, there's definitely diverse perspectives for sure. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it means people care. We're in way bigger trouble when people stop caring. So, what is my approach? My approach and really I think what I would and do expect is we have to show up for conversations. And especially the hard ones. We have to listen to perspectives and then we have to listen some more and find common ground. And again, I say these things and I do think you could roll your eyes and just go, yeah, sure, But I really do believe that this works. For many people, wolves are an example of the urban rural divide. But, fundamentally, if you talk to wolf advocacy groups and you talk to livestock producers, they agree. We need to prevent wolf livestock conflict. The tension is how you get there. It is difficult work. It's the people part of natural resources. It takes time and to even have those conversations, you have to have trust. And my strategy has been trying to build trust between different perspectives and the agency. For some of these groups, they just have not felt like the agency even gave them a voice at the table. So that, just bringing them in. And then the really big thing is when you can actually have folks talking amongst themselves, and we're farther along in some of those tough kind of urban rural divides than others. I think that I encourage us all when we think about these areas of tension, that's what I'll call them, that we just really have to replace judgment with curiosity. And we have to try some things and learn. And honestly, it's not always bad to have tension. Sometimes it can actually give you a place to make change. People get real motivated and it's messy. And honestly, a lot of those tough ones, you can't whiteboard it. You can't be like, okay, so here's our whiteboard. We're going to do this, then we're going to do that. It's one step forward, half step back. One thing blows up and then you just kind of feel like, oh boy, okay, get back out there and talk some more. It's not a perfect system, but I guess I share that because it's like my philosophy that you just keep showing up, right? And that's what I expect of the agency is to keep showing up. In terms of a shared vision for natural resource management, an example, I really would like to talk about kind of just the most recent work that we've been doing to implement our commission's climate and ocean policy. Really, just as a kind of leadership team, we have been leaning in to asking ourselves, like, what does it mean to implement the commission's climate policy? And you all have heard us talk about this kind of framework for how we are thinking about it, which is really thinking about it in terms of species resiliency and adaptation, how to manage increasing complexity, and then how to really kind of sustain the agency so that we can keep doing the work we need to do. And, we're having these conversations around this framework at multiple levels. We're talking to our fish and wildlife managers. And so these are the folks that are really kind of like on the ground that are running our research program, running our watershed districts. And we're asking them, like, are we focused on the right things? Like, like we're all really, really busy. And I mean, we just did breakout groups around this where we're like, okay, if you could carve out 10% of every person, that's 1,300 people, 10% of their time to focus on what you think is really important in terms of species resiliency, what would it be? And if we were to do that, what do we have to stop doing? And all of that truly is about empowering people to question. I don't mind being questioned. I love questions. I mean, we left these breakout groups and people were already again, I don't want any judgment in the external, like people were like, why are we still sampling like X? It has no limit and on how many people can catch. They're so abundant, and yet we're putting all this energy, empowering people just ask those questions. Um, it's where we're engaging the commission, that same natural resource framework, and we're really kind of drilling down with you on kind of like what is the role of natural working lands in how we deliver resiliency and address complexity. And then as we have been building our budget, we've also used that same framework to say, where do we need to invest? And also where do we need to disinvest? So, it becomes the framework for thinking about it on so many different ways. So, this is something that we are building, that we are working with different groups on. But I just think it's a good example of how to kind of give a framework that works in many different ways and can really help kind of focus the agency.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. Next question is shorter than the first one. What is your assessment of the role of hunting as a recreational activity in natural resource management? How do you approach the balance between wildlife conservation and accommodating recreational hunting opportunities?
All right, thank you. Another good question. I did mention earlier that I've been looking at way too much social media this week. Terrible idea when you're going into an interview process. Just going to say that right now. But I will say I've read enough on social media to know that people are worried about this. They're very worried about this, and they're worried about a change in director and what that means for hunting. And honestly, I just have to say that this is one of those times where I'm just going to ask people to look at my record and, talk to the hunters and the hunting organizations that I've worked with. I think that they would tell you that I respect that hunting brings a connection for so many people to the outdoors, and frankly to even their family. Like it's very deep connection for them. And I would say that from my perspective, I don't think that we should ever discount the impact that hunters have had on conservation of species and habitat in our country and in our state, historically and today. And everybody goes immediately to licenses and revenue. And that's true. It has funded conservation. It's why we have some species that today we would not have, but for those revenues. But what people lose, I think, in that picture is it's also through a lot of volunteers and hunting groups that are doing on the ground projects that benefit habitat and wildlife conservation, that lifts all boats in terms of species, not just those that are hunted. And hunting keeps people connected to the resource. So we have this group of people that care deeply about these populations, threats to their habitats, and they're willing to advocate for them. In my experience, hunters and hunting organizations, they show up for conservation in meaningful ways in our state capitol, with our federal delegation, at local counties that are making land use and other decisions. These hunters and groups, they've been on the leading edge on a number of areas like wildlife connectivity projects, bringing focus and attention to land use and renewable siting impacts on habitat for our wildlife, and protecting public lands, and just numerous other areas. And so I see no disconnect between conservation and providing for hunting opportunities. So that's my take. I went faster on that one.
Thank you, Debbie. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
Debbie, how do you see the role of hatcheries and other management tools in fisheries management and conservation efforts for various species of fish? Can you discuss the diverse perspectives on hatchery operations within the community and the considerations that need to be balanced by the department to maintain sustainable fisheries?
We're in the home stretch. All right. Okay. Hatcheries. I'm I'm not surprised to have a question related to hatcheries. And just to kind of set as a reminder to everybody in terms of the role of hatcheries, ODFW has 33 hatcheries that we run across the state. Those hatcheries produce about 36 million salmon and steelhead and about 5 million trout. And these hatcheries play an important role in fish management in Oregon in what I think 3 different ways. Mitigation. These hatcheries are there to some amount of our hatcheries are there to mitigate for lost fishing opportunity and habitat related to damming on Columbia, Willamette, and the Rogue. So, I mean, that's just kind of a short answer. You know, that's part of the role that hatcheries play. It also has an important role in harvest. In most locations, wild fish alone cannot sustain the demand for harvest opportunity. We have more than 600,000 anglers that engage in fishing, some in catch and release, but the majority are seeking to take home a fish, and hatcheries account for about 75% of the salmon and steelhead harvested and more than 90% of the trout harvested in this state. So they are playing an important role in terms of harvest. And lastly, and very importantly, hatchery programs play an important role in supplementing very weak wild populations or reintroducing fish to areas that they've been extirpated from. And, you know, we've got examples of this. We've seen, for example, self-sustaining runs of spring Chinook now exist on the Umatilla as a result of hatchery supplementation. We're using hatchery fish to help reestablish populations above the dams in the Willamette. And we're using hatchery fish to try and reintroduce chum in the lower Columbia. It's also not just that these conservations are important, that these programs are important, but again, just coming back to, I think, a theme that you're probably picking up on is that this is how people are staying connected with the resource. And once again, similar to kind of talking about hunters and their role, being able to stay engaged, to bring home a fish. Again, we have a group of people that care deeply about the fate of salmon and steelhead and their habitats, and they're willing to advocate. And again, they show up. They show up for us in ways that help prevent bad things from happening, like federal agencies that are not fulfilling their obligations in terms of their mitigation. They show up to help advance really critical investments in monitoring and evaluation and research for our fish species. And just the list goes on. Given all this, I will say I do not see a future in which hatcheries are not necessary to meet demand and the conservation need, especially in the face of the changing climate. That said, we know that hatchery fish can, if not managed appropriately, have impacts on wild fish. In recognition of this, the department implemented significant reforms since the 90s to ensure hatchery fish are good neighbors to wild fish. These reforms, while not the whole reason, are one of the reasons why Oregon stands out among our neighboring states in terms of relatively healthy wild populations, primarily on the Oregon coast. For example, winter steelhead this past year was best in over a decade. Fall Chinook, coho, just a shining star. But also in places like Clackamas and Sandy, both of which are seeing a marked upward trajectory. Of course, like wolves, there's tension because of the way we manage hatcheries, with some believing we are too conservative, some believing we're not conservative enough. We will always follow the science, which continues to evolve, and we will continue to play a role in pushing that science forward. Likewise, our policies on hatchery fish will continue to evolve with the science, but also in recognition of the impact of climate change. Hatcheries are not a silver bullet, but managed appropriately, they play an important role in keeping people connected to the resources and providing for conservation and meeting the mitigation obligations. I think I've answered that.
Thank you, Debbie.
Patrick, we've got like 6 minutes left. I just want to let you know.
Okay.
One question.
And that last question is, given that revenue for ODF&W has primarily come from sources related to hunting and fishing and federal funds for obligated purposes, how would you advocate for and secure additional funding to meet the conservation needs of all species? What is your approach to conservation efforts for all species, and what initiatives or programs would you build with new revenue?
Ooh, I could build a lot of programs, though. Okay, so I'm going to start by just kind of in this respect, in terms of wildlife conservation and programs, start with kind of where we've made some headway first. In recent years, as you know, we've been pretty successful in getting general fund for habitat, especially our water programs. And my strategy on that front is really just amplifying the work of our amazing partners. I mean, honestly, we would not have a habitat division. We would not have the investments in our water program if we did not have some really talented advocates working on our behalf. And so my strategy is just like, what do you need? How do I help? Tell the story of the good work we can get done when those advocates show up for us and deliver on those kind of resources. My strategy has also been pretty opportunistic, honestly, in terms of wildlife conservation. And I think a really good example of that opportunistic approach has been trying to go hard as an agency on securing the federal funds through the infrastructure and inflation bills. So again, it's not building permanent program, but it's pretty much kind of like all hands on deck, move quickly, focus your efforts, embrace our role as matchmaker to bring as much money to Oregon as possible. And I mean, honestly, thanks to our staff and our many, many partners, directly as pass-through or as collaboration, we've secured more than $120 million for Oregon in just the last 3 years. And this blows me away. Our application success rate is 1 out of every 2, which is phenomenal when you look at what we're competing with from the other states. It's just, I just could not feel more proud. And that money has been focused on a broad range of conservation issues and advancing that kind of conservation work. Beyond these recent wins on habitat, I recognize that we have got to build sustained resources for funds for our conservation work and for engaging new audiences in conservation. And again, I think a recent win on this that's more kind of around sustained program is one of the things that I worked on when I was in the governor's office was working with governor's office legislators and advocacy groups to help set up the governance structure for the use of the Monsanto funds. And so in the 24 session, as many of you know, that those Monsanto funds were placed in endowment, and the state will use the interest off that endowment to do really work that addresses the underlying kind of impacts of PCBs, but also just provide for uplift. And it was a huge win that 50% of that interest per biennium must go to state agencies that have a nexus with the kind of work that was envisioned. So that I see as a real opportunity to build, and they specified, thanks to our advocates, that this is not supposed to be grant, like just one off. You can't get good things done just through grant making. You have to have sustained program. You can't hire a herpetologist and then have them gone in 2 years. Like, we have got to have capacity in this area. And so that is going to be a really great source. And, you know, we're going to work hard to access that. So that's one where I feel hopeful that a more sustained approach. And then I will just say that if you have talked to me in the last year, you know that I, regardless of whether I'm the director, as deputy director or director, I am just doubling down on alternative revenues. And I think that our stakeholders have come up with a really great approach. I feel like how long have we been talking about this? Decades, task force. Like, I'm sorry, but the time is now. I think it's actually strategically really awesome. And I'll tell you why now is the time. But I will say, if we're going to talk alternative revenue, it has to be substantial. It's going to be a lift for all of us to get this done with the legislature. And so it really needs to be kind of on the scale that can fund programs. And basically, I'm all in. And I have the blessing of the governor's office to be engaging rather than kind of in the background quietly just giving information. So I'm excited to be empowered in that way, to be a part of those conversations. And honestly, I could, there's so many things that you could put that money toward. Things that come to my mind, I think we got to continue to build our habitat division. I mean, habitat floats all boats, especially in light of some of what we're talking about in terms of species adaptation. I think we got to focus on our 294 strategy species that have been identified as having the greatest conservation need. We got to have core programs. We need to fill data gaps. We need to have experts on staff to even help us understand what we know and what those limiting factors are really, and what we can do to respond to the needs of those species. And then I think we need to really spend some money engaging the public and bringing in new folks. And I think that the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund is like a perfect place. They have built that. I see a real opportunity to have dedicated funds because we can leverage the relationships and the diverse groups that they have been bringing in through that program. And then, of course, the Beaver Action Plan and a million other things. Like, you know, we got to talk dollars. Yeah. But those are just some of the things that I see just a tremendous need and a really suitable fit for alternative funding for conservation.
Thank you, Debbie. In 1 minute, can you just give a closing statement, if you will?
Oh, well, I guess I would just close by saying that, again, I am very honored to be a part of this. I am so excited about the work that the agency has ahead of it. And I look forward, if I am director, to working with our commission to advance this, continuing to work with our great leadership team and staff and stakeholders, and just really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Debbie. Chair Wall.
I don't have anything to add except to echo what Vice Chair Commissioner Hatfield Hyde said earlier, which is it has to be a very grueling process that the candidates have been through. And on behalf of the commission, thank you for going through it. It's just remarkable. So.
Yeah, I'm getting the hook.
Okay. Yes, 5-minute break, and we will bring the other candidate in just a few minutes. the public session. I'm so sorry to do this to
That's
you.
quite all right.
We'll let you back up a few paragraphs when we get it back on, but we've got to get it back on because this is the public session and people need to hear this
Yes,
part.
absolutely. Thank
So-
you.
Yeah, and it's really good. Yeah, everyone should hear it.
So we're scrambling to do it.
That's okay. We've been dealing with tech issues all morning. I'm just going to take a deep breath. It'll work itself out.
That's what we'll
Roll
do
with it.
as well. Yes.
Chair Wall, can you repeat the thing about Modus and how?
We're going to rewind all the way back.
On the audio.
Can I have someone that's on the Teams meeting? Let me know if there is sound coming through Teams.
There's sound coming from Teams.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
With our repeated apologies.
That's quite all right.
Go ahead, both of you.
I apologize, Caitlin, for the technical difficulties. Viewers on YouTube, we thank you for your patience. We're gonna start over with Caitlyn's opening statement.
Thank you. I will skip ahead past the acknowledgements and the congratulations and start with my prepared remarks. This dais looks very different than my first commission meeting in LeGrand 23 years ago. Seeing ourselves in ODFW's leadership is a first step towards my vision of making ODFW more relevant and accessible to more Oregonians. For 22 years, I've been a farmer in the small community of Colton, not too far, just a few miles from former Director Melcher. I have worked in all corners of the state, including its largest city. I have had conversations on sidewalks, in kitchens, on trails, and in truck beds about what we can do to protect and enhance fish and wildlife. I've worked directly with tribes on and off reservation efforts. I can bridge the urban-rural divide and grow ODFW's reach across Oregon. Let me be clear, hunting and fishing is in the DNA of this agency, but we are going to need an all-hands-on approach to protect fish, wildlife, and their habitats in the face of climate change. Every relationship matters. Climate change is the status quo for ODF&W. My vision is that ODFW is a leader among state agencies in preparing for and leading solutions to the climate crisis so that our fish and wildlife and our rural and urban economies that depend so heavily on healthy and abundant land and water thrive. If I am selected, ODFW will lead with the science to be proactive, nimble, responsive, adaptive, and resilient to climate change. ODFW must serve that crucial role in this administration's Climate and Natural Resources Cabinet. Protecting and enhancing fish and wildlife in their habitats for current and future generations, I should read it right up there, is going to be expensive. It cannot be borne on the backs of hunters and fishers. My third priority is to put ODFW on a path to long-term financial stability that does not rely as heavily on hunting and fishing fees. Notably, I ran the largest fish and wildlife municipal program in the state of Oregon, and my revenue stream looked very different than ODFW's. I can bring proven new ideas into ODFW's financial future. And finally, I just want to take a moment really to speak to staff and to the public on organizational culture. I have led change and been subject to change, including some historical changes underway right now. I know how uncertain and scary it is, but it can also be a time for lifting new ideas, for addressing long-standing challenges, and for dusting off stagnation. In my experience, change is most durable when it comes from within, from those who know the root cause and have great ideas for solutions. I want to assure staff and the public that I would create a culture of celebrating ODFW's strengths while tackling the areas that employees help to identify. I know how to get wins, and it starts with listening and learning and tackling the problems and not the symptoms. I am excited to be considered to lead ODFW into this future. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. We're going to first start off with SEIU's questions. And Chris, are you there? Is it Chris?
I think it'll be Kelly this time.
Okay, sorry about that.
She's on the phone.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly.
Good morning.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Give me just a second to pull up the questions. Sorry, I'm having my own technical difficulties over here. Okay. Good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Interim Director Palmieri, and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Kelly Lawrence. I'm an SEIU member, and I am on the Fisheries Research Team at the Marine Resources Program in Newport. And I am here on behalf of over 800 union represented staff. We would like to express our gratitude for being included today because it's important for staff to have a voice in this process. Okay, first question. ODFW staff often engage the public while performing their duties for the agency, often in remote areas of the state with spotty reception. This means that workers may encounter dangerous individuals or people engaging in illegal activities, harmful to habitats, harmful to habitats or wildlife. Can you tell us of a time when you worked with your staff to implement safety procedures to protect your staff? And can you tell us how staff are an integral part of the development of field safety plans?
Good morning, Kelly, and thank you so much for that question. I think this is the most important question today. Safety of ODFW employees is paramount. There is nothing that ODFW does that is worth risking the safety of its employees. But there are inherent dangers in these jobs. Let me tell you what I've done about safety. When I took over the city's monitoring program, we revamped it in 2010. We put safety up front. We created safety protocols that included a buddy system. We instituted training protocols for electroshocking and boat safety. And we set an expectation that employees should walk away when they encounter any unsafe situation and immediately call 911, that they should really not engage. More recently, this has become a more acute problem. I personally have been assaulted while walking into the office. I have had staff go out to remove dams on public property and have rifles pointed at them from sniper platforms. This is not that severe these days. I just want to assure everybody the mayor would be really mad at me for painting that picture of the city. It's much, much better. But it has led to incredibly important safety protocol changes. First, we've created a safety division with a safety manager. We receive safety beacons weekly, and they're all employees, not just field staff. And those are developed with the input of field staff. We've instituted a tremendous amount of additional training, including from folks who help us train on how to diffuse situations for people who are going through mental health crises. And then more recently, we've also created protocols for requesting police presence or ranger escorts to some of these sites if we feel unsafe. And so moving forward, I would really want to understand the current resources and the current safety culture at ODFW. What kind of resources do you have in the field, such as beacons and satellite phones? What kind of staffing resources do you have to institute a buddy system? And I would work to elevate and create a culture of safety and ask, starting with field staff, what do they need to be safe on their jobs? And then go from there. But I think, as I mentioned, this is paramount to creating a culture of safety at ODFW. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Kelly, you want to give us our next question, please?
Yeah, just a second here. Sorry, doing this from my phone is not great. Okay, second question. OEFW staff work tirelessly to navigate complex policies, budgets, and regulations to ensure that habitats are healthy and sustainable for wildlife to thrive. Can you tell us of a time when you actively involved staff in policy development to bridge the gap between decision makers and on-the-ground staff, given their local expertise? And can you commit to working with staff in policy development?
Great. Thank you, Kelly, for that second question. And thank you to all the ODFW employees for that great work that you do. It's very clear that you care about your work and you are all very good at it. My favorite place is on a river, really any river, but I especially love the Imnaha, the confluence of the Snake, just if anybody's listening. But as a scientist turned lawyer, my second favorite place is at the intersection of law, science, and policy. That is how I like to operate. At Trout Unlimited, I work to elevate the voice of agency scientists who saw their excellent work misrepresented or even absent from major policy decisions. For 13 years, I've led my science team at the city to operate in this space, not only because I believe that good science leads to good policy, it is the bedrock of most of our environmental laws. It is so important to have a direct line of sight between the science and the data to inform those good policy decisions. But it's not just science. It's especially for an agency that is so big with so many field staff and field offices, that line of sight to the field, to the folks on the ground who are experiencing really how these things get implemented and are effective on the ground is just as important. And so when we reorganized in the city in 2020, our bureau, I insisted on having scientists with me in the policy realm. But we can't do that in an agency this big and have direct presence in all of these policymaking decision bodies. However, we can ensure that there are those lines of sight. I would like to start by instituting what we do called the 4P practice, where we ask for each policy decision, who are the people that are impacted? What's the process? And is it fair and equitable? Who is in power making these decisions and who is impacted by those decisions, and do they look and sound the same? And what is the place in which these decisions are being felt? And are we including that voice in this decision making? Creating multiple interdisciplinary teams to ensure that we are addressing those 4Ps, I think will be that important line of sight. In addition, I think creating a pre-public staff draft of policies and circulating that internally among staff who are most impacted by the decisions will allow us to directly solicit that information from staff so that we don't miss an opportunity before we actually go out to the public with the draft. And then finally, I always have an open door policy. And so if there are concerns about the break in the line of sight with field staff and scientists in these policy decisions, I would want to know about it and try to understand how we can remedy that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you, Kelly, again for those two questions. We're going to move on to 4 questions coming from the public. And the question, they are verbose, and I apologize for that. But the first question is, how would you address the challenge of bridging divides between urban and rural communities to foster unity in conservation efforts? How would you ensure that conservation initiatives are inclusive and responsive to the needs of Oregonians, regardless of their geographical location or background? And can you provide an example of a successful leadership strategy you implemented to bring together diverse perspectives and build consensus around a shared vision for conservation and natural resource management?
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so glad these questions are right here so I can have a little bit of a cheat sheet. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Fish and Wildlife do not recognize the urban-rural divide. Just like a political boundary, it is a human construct. Second, I am uniquely situated to breach that divide because I have a foot firmly in each. I doubt anyone in this room, or really anyone even online, has a deeper understanding of the urban fish and wildlife issues. I have also worked in every corner of the state, and I'm a longtime resident of a small rural community.
I too wake up in the middle of the night, not from the sound of a garbage truck, but to the coyotes howling and my livestock guardian dogs warning me that something's on the prowl. To be very clear, when I talk about urban issues, I'm talking about the very real and complex fish and wildlife challenges that exist in heavily developed areas. When we look past the people and the organizations and focus on the issues, we have so much more in common. We have ESA listings, we have fish and wildlife passage, we have loss of habitat, land use conflicts, very real challenges with climate change that affect water quality and water quantity and the health of our landscapes. We deeply need to understand how these issues also affect different communities, not just our Native Americans and our communities of color, but also our farm workers and our multi-generational landowners. Let me speak to what I've done and what I would do with ODFW. I've worked on very collaborative processes to help bridge the urban-rural divide on Oregon Coast Coho, really understanding the impacts of coastal cities and coastal landscapes and helping to contribute to that recovery. And I'm very proud of ODFW's, the state Oregon Coast Coho Recovery Plan that has really led to an improvement in that species. It has definite staying power, and I was at the front of those conversations. Also on the Klamath, very early on, I was involved in the Klamath when I was with Trout Unlimited. And while many people remember the dam fights, quite literally, where I was as the Oregon local counsel on that issue was actually in front of the Public Utility Commission as the local council negotiating the sale of Pacific Power's dams to Mid-American Energy Holding Company and making sure that that transfer of ownership did not preclude dam removal. In that room with me was the CUB, sorry, I'm remembering acronyms, but not full names, the Citizens Utility Board, Renewable Energy Northwest, tribes. I was the only conservation group at that table in very difficult negotiations. That was such a critical part. I don't think most people on the ground working on the Klamath understood what kind of risk there was in that land transfer, in that utility sale. And so being able to identify where those risks are and what are the key levers that need to be pulled to ensure success over the long term is something that I really thrive at. Those are the places where you bring together and you find those shared outcomes for urban and rural communities. Moving forward, I would look at areas where we share species, where we share interests, and we can set the bar. I have done that already. One example of that is with mitigation banking. It's an area we all know about mitigation, I assume, that ODFW has been great in some areas, most recently the Forest Practices Act and the accords, the private forest accords. And in that, we have found that communities have a difficult time engaging in mitigation. And so I went to the deputy director of DSL and asked to assist the state in helping to find solutions that not just benefit Portland, but benefit all of Oregon, that help break down the regulatory barriers, the financial hurdles, and the equity hurdles. And we've been working together. The state effort has kind of fizzled, but we have been able to continue to work towards that. And the goal is still the same, to use our resources to address some of those universal challenges that help open this tool up to all of Oregon. So I would continue to try to find those ways to bring people together around common causes that serve the whole of Oregon.
Great, thank you, Caitlyn. Second question, please. Caitlyn, what is your assessment of the role of hunting as a recreational activity in natural resource management? How do you approach the balance between wildlife conservation and accommodating recreational hunting opportunities?
It's a great question. I'm not a hunter. I am not going to try to sell something that I can't. But I live in a hunting community. And in fact, my driveway serves as the entrance to a large area of hunting grounds. And I frequently encounter hunters on the trail. And I love talking to them. I love sharing
what we see out there when we're out there, where the patterns are, where they're congregating, when, and how that changes as our land use changes. If there's, timber operations happening, new roads going in, how that changes the patterns of where they see, especially deer and elk around me. So let me say it again. Hunting is in the DNA of this agency. That is not going to change. I can support that even if I am not a hunter. I'll give you an example because I know it's really, you have no reason to believe me when I say I can support something if I'm not a hunter. This is going to sound odd, but it's very personal. So it's proof that I can do this. I'm a vegetarian. I have been since 1996. Yet my husband and my son are not. I am the farmer in the family. So I actually raise livestock for them to eat. And on the day that comes when I need to slaughter my pigs, I am the one out there doing the slaughtering, even though I know I won't eat them. So it is very possible for me to be able to support something, to lift it, and to make sure it is successful, even if I am not the one out there doing that work. The North American, I want to take a moment in this question also to address the North American model of conservation, because I think it's good, but it's also not enough. We have seen wildlife declines with that model in place. That model is, although based in the public trust doctrine, is really focused on the use of wildlife for humans. It does not include other values such as intrinsic values, spiritual and cultural values that we find, especially in the indigenous, traditional, and ecological knowledge and culture system. I think this is a great time for us to marry those, to bring those together, to really expand how the North American model of conservation can really work to help elevate habitat and multiple uses of wildlife. I think when we do that and we look at the whole system and the whole landscape, the hunting experiences improve because we are improving the abundance of our wildlife, the quality of our wildlife, and the health of our whole systems. So that wildlife is not just available there for hunters, but available for wildlife watchers and other users of the entire ecosystem. And it moves us away from a species-based approach to a systems-based approach. But I do think that the North American model of conservation is the basis for all of that, and that continues to remain strong, and we must support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next question. How do you see the role of hatcheries and other management tools in fisheries management and conservation efforts for various species of fish? Can you discuss the diverse perspectives on hatchery operations within the community and the considerations that need to be balanced by the department to maintain sustainable fisheries?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I knew this was going to come up. It was exactly 20 years ago in 2004 when I was working at Trout Unlimited that we published a scientific report for the first time calling the question of whether we are actually building the right hatcheries in the right place for the right purpose. That came at a time when the legal world was in a pitched battle, and I was in the middle of it, to prevent or allow, depending on your perspective, the counting of hatchery fish in ESA listing decisions. So it's no surprise, being the first to call the question, that Trout Unlimited and myself became targets. But there were many hatcheries who listened to the science and took heed and made changes. ODFW even scaled back their coastal coho hatchery program, as I mentioned earlier, and that ultimately led to directly opening up a fishery on a listed stock. That's an incredible accomplishment. TU also supported, TU being Trout Unlimited, supported funding to address deferred maintenance, and we supported hatchery production and repurposing for reintroduction in places like the Deschutes. Today, climate change is calling that same question, and there is no way to shout it down. Hatcheries are reliant on our natural systems. They use our streams, our oceans, and our healthy riparian habitat in order to be successful. Wildfires, temperatures, and disease outbreaks. I compare raceways to the piscatorial COVID cruise with some of the diseases that we're seeing break out in hatcheries as a result of climate change. These were all problems that we identified 20 years ago that are coming true today, very acutely so. But our science is better and our practices are better.
and money is finally flowing into deferred maintenance. We have this great opportunity to make hatcheries work well for the system and really see them as part of the system. They are a fundamental tool in our fishery management strategies. But the time is right to set a new foundation for how hatchery assessments are moving forward. And I'm really pleased that the legislature has directed ODFW to do just that. I think the hatchery assessment will provide a solid foundation for confronting these challenges and ensuring the agency is prepared to face these challenges. Thanks to nearly 17 years at a utility, I also have a much deeper understanding of asset management. Asset management is basically bureaucratic speak for good housekeeping on a limited budget. With this foundation that ODFW is currently undertaking, we can use that to help prioritize investments and ensure that hatcheries are producing the benefits that we need for the watershed and for the communities, while also protecting and restoring native stocks. I would use that assessment to look ahead at how we can invest the limited dollars into making hatcheries successful by putting the right hatchery in the right place for the right purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlyn. This is the last question. Given that revenue for ODF&W has primarily come from sources related to hunting and fishing and federal funds for obligated purposes, how would you advocate for and secure additional funding to meet the conservation needs of all species? What is your approach to conservation efforts for all species, and what initiatives or programs would you build with new revenue?
That's great. Thank you very much for that question. When I was at the city, a while ago at the city, I had the great fortune of having a brilliant staffer, Claire Pucci. Sorry, Claire, for embarrassing you. She worked with multiple bureaus, external stakeholders, and other governments to develop our terrestrial ecology and enhancement strategy, which we called TEAS. That was funded primarily through utility ratepayer dollars, not hunting and fishing fees. And in many ways, it was the urban version of the Oregon Conservation Strategy. It was a multi-species approach that advocated for projects and programs and other efforts to address habitat and benefit multiple species. However, in response to litigation, we had to pull back some of the funding, and we have instead pivoted and integrated TEAS into our day-to-day work. It is implemented in really unique ways. For example, we have created a beaver intervention decision matrix for our stormwater utilities. It starts with education revolving around living with beaver, and it's something that we apply to all of the bureaus, not just my bureau, but to parks, to PBOT, to Water Bureau. And with that decision matrix, we were able to work with ODFW, Metro, BLM, MCDD, sorry, acronyms, the Drainage District, the Columbia River Levee Drainage District, and ODFW on an agreement that allows for us to trap and relocate beavers to BLM lands on Mount Hood. And in doing so, the city contributed to building a quarantine facility at Metro in order to facilitate that, so that we are not euthanizing beaver until it's a last resort. That strategy has really recognized the role that beaver play in critical habitats, even urban habitats, and it can serve as a model across the state for how do we enhance keystone species using different funding strategies and partnerships. We've also created a manual to prevent disrupting nesting birds during construction projects, and we have biologists on staff who are paid for through construction project dollars, which are typically utility dollars or grants that help us do our jobs better. We also include in our salvage lamprey salvage, mussel salvage, and crayfish, in addition to salmon and steelhead and other native and non-native fish. We don't relocate the non-native fish. We work collaboratively with parks on their efforts to monitor fish and other wildlife. On a break, you can ask me about bedazzling mussels. I really have a lot of awe and admiration for the Legislative Task Force on Funding as an excellent effort, which really led to the development of the OCRF. I think that the inclusion of multi-species and habitat conservation agreements, such as the private forest accords and the Elliott Forest, are a great way of advancing different approaches and funding structures to these multi-species approaches, especially the non-game. But there is more to be done. This is an area that if I were selected, I would put time and attention to elevating and solving, including updates to the OCS, treating OCS as a climate strategy for wildlife, looking for new funding opportunities such as carbon funding, something that we've developed in the city and I know is an interesting discussion within the climate communities. Also, though, there are 3 different ways that you can stretch your budget further. You can make budget cuts, you can find new external revenue sources, and you can do your work differently. I think working together across agencies, finding those efficiencies, finding areas where we have shared outcomes and shared funding streams that can be used to leverage each other. I think the Willamette Wildlife Funding Program with BPA mitigation funding is a great example of that, where we paired it with Meyer Memorial Trust and OWEB funding. That can really stretch the dollars farther to get better outcomes on the ground, and we need to look for more of those opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlyn. You could take this moment now to say a closing remark.
I really just want to thank you. I know how hard this decision is. I know there are many voices that you hear from all of the time. I think those are important considerations in all of this, but I also think there are a lot of voices that we don't hear from. And I look forward to encouraging and creating the space and opening those lines of communication with communities who really don't understand the value and the benefits that ODFW brings to their day-to-day life and how we can make Oregon a livable, healthy, and resilient state for fish, wildlife, and people. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Wall?
The thing that I would like most to say is just to recognize the process that you've been through with all of these interviews and this recruitment process, and thank you for it. It can't have been easy, but we appreciate it, and we look forward to another interview with you with just the commission later this afternoon. And I think with that, we will thank both of you and break for a few minutes and move to the room that we'll have the executive session in. So we'll get to see you again. So on behalf of the commission, thank you for what you have gone through, your accomplishments, and for being here today. Thank you. Commissioners need to stay here. Other people don't need to listen to this necessarily, but the commission does, because I need to read into the script, into the record, the script for executive session. The commission will now meet in executive session to consider the 2 finalists for the director position. The 2 finalists are Debbie Colbert and Caitlyn Lovel. The authority for the executive session is the Oregon Public Meetings Law, ORS 192.6602A, which authorizes the commission to meet in executive session to consider the employment of the director. Representatives of the news media and certain staff are allowed to attend. All other persons are asked to leave the room. Reporters are directed not to report on the discussions during executive session except to state the general subject. No decisions will be made in executive session. And at the end of executive session, we will do what we always do, come back into regular session in order to continue the discussion and make our decisions. So thank you, and do be aware, this is a long session, a long executive session, so we're not going to be back in 10 minutes. It will be late in the day when we will be back. So thank you all very much for this morning so far, and commissioners, we will move to our next room. Thank you.